The marble floor still echoed with his voice when the first tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of weakness, it was the kind that burns, that tastes like iron, that carries the weight of centuries. People say racism is quieter these days, polite even. But in that high-ceilinged bank lobby, beneath the crystal chandelier and the smug portrait of the founder, it was loud enough to silence every other sound. Daniel Whitford, the bank's director, didn't whisper his venom. He spat it like poison in front of staff and customers, his expensive cufflinks glinting under the lights as if mocking the woman standing before him. "You people," he sneered, leaning forward so close that she could smell his minty arrogance. "Always trying to play the victim. You think a bank like this owes you anything?" The woman Aisha Carter stood with her chin high, one hand clutching the leather strap of her purse as though holding onto her last bit of composure. She'd come in to finalize a mortgage for the small home she'd dreamed of for years. Instead, she found herself being stripped of dignity in the place where her grandmother used to polish the brass railings as a cleaner. Around them, silence swelled like a held breath. A young teller, maybe fresh out of college, shifted uncomfortably. An older man in line looked away, shame painting his face in shades of guilt he'd never name. The security guard's hand hovered near his belt, not for a gun, but as if even he was unsure whether the danger here was physical or moral. Aisha's voice trembled, but not from fear. "I've done everything you asked, Mr. Whitford. I submitted all the documents. I have the credit. I have the down payment. You said the approval was just a formality." Whitford gave a slow, almost pitying shake of his head. "We have discretion, Miss Carter. And frankly, we have to think about the kind of people we want in our neighborhoods." It was the kind of sentence that didn't just bruise, it left scars. From the corner of the room, a customer pulled out his phone. The quiet click of a camera app cut through the air like a snap of brittle ice. Whitford noticed, his jaw tightening, but his ego was too inflated to stop. "Go ahead, film. No one's going to care. She won't get the loan. That's final." But he was wrong. Very wrong. Because 2 blocks away, in an unmarked SUV, Special Agent Mara Delgado was reading through a report that had been building for months, a report that included Whitford's name in bold, his signature on falsified loan denials, and a list of targeted clients who all had one thing in common: the color of their skin. And today, they were ready to move. Back in the bank, Aisha refused to lower her gaze. "Do you know what my father told me before he died?" she asked, her voice steady now. "That the measure of a man isn't how he treats those above him, but those he thinks are beneath him." Whitford laughed, short and sharp, like a gavel striking down. "Well, I guess you've just measured me, haven't you?" The double glass doors burst open. The sound was sudden, shattering the sterile hush of the lobby, a kind of entrance that makes every head whip around. A rush of cold air carried in the scent of rain, and with it, the thunder of boots against tile. FBI. Nobody moved. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that tastes like justice. Whitford's confident smirk evaporated, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed confusion. His hand still mid-gesture toward Aisha hung frozen in the air like a guilty statue. Agent Delgado stepped forward, badge glinting. "Daniel Whitford, you are under arrest for multiple counts of discriminatory lending practices, fraud, and obstruction of justice." The click of the handcuffs was almost poetic. Aisha didn't smile. This wasn't a victory she'd wanted, but one that had been forced upon her. Still, as Whitford was led past her, she met his eyes. And for the first time all morning, he looked away. Outside, the rain began to fall. Not a heavy, punishing rain, but a steady one, washing the marble steps, the bank's brass railings, and perhaps, just perhaps, the smallest corner of a poisoned system. The rain didn't stop the crowd from forming. Within minutes, the street outside the Whitford Financial Branch was a hive of voices, umbrellas, and flashing camera lights. Reporters from local channels shoved microphones toward anyone who looked like they'd seen something. Customers, tellers, even the security guard who was now fumbling with his earpiece as if pretending not to hear. Aisha remained inside, her pulse still drumming in her ears. The glass walls made the lobby feel like a fishbowl. She could see the cluster of people pressing against the building, their faces reflecting a strange mix of curiosity, outrage, and voyeurism. Agent Delgado turned toward her. "Miss Carter." Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that comes from years of talking to both victims and suspects. Would you be willing to give a statement? Aisha blinked. Right now? Yes. It's important to document everything while it's fresh. She hesitated. The truth was still raw, jagged in her mouth. Every word she'd have to repeat would be like peeling the skin off a wound. But then she remembered the look on Whitford's face, the one that told her he thought he could get away with it because people like her didn't fight back. All right, she said finally. Delgado led her to a small conference room at the back of the bank. The glass door shut, muting the noise outside, but it couldn't mute the ache in Aisha's chest. The agent clicked on a small recorder. Start from the beginning. Tell me why you were here today. Aisha took a deep breath. I've been saving for this house for 7 years. Every bonus, every overtime shift. My credit's clean. My income steady. I had every piece of paperwork you asked for. But when I came in last month, Mr. Whitford looked at me like I didn't belong here. Said there were additional checks. Delgado's eyes narrowed slightly. Additional checks. Did he specify? No. Just delays. Then calls that went unanswered. When I finally got through to him this week, he said I needed to come in today to finalize the decision. And what happened in the meeting? Aisha's throat tightened, but she pushed through. He told me outright that people like me aren't the kind of people they want in that neighborhood. He said it wasn't personal, it was policy. Her voice cracked at the word. Delgado's pen didn't pause. Policy. That's what he called it. For a moment, the only sound was the rain ticking against the windows. Delgado finally clicked off the recorder. Ms. Carter, I need you to understand what you just described isn't just morally wrong. It's illegal, and it's exactly what we've been investigating Whitford for. Aisha frowned. You've been investigating him? For months, Delgado confirmed. We've had multiple reports denials of loans for qualified Black and Latino clients. The numbers are impossible to ignore. And your case, she leaned forward slightly. Your case might be the one that seals it. Aisha wasn't sure how to feel about that. Being the one wasn't something she wanted. It meant she'd have to relive every humiliating detail over and over. But maybe, just maybe, it meant Whitford wouldn't get to do this to anyone else. When they stepped back into the lobby, Whitford was gone, escorted out the side door into a waiting black SUV. But the cameras were still there, hungry for a shot of anyone connected to the scene. A man in a windbreaker and press badge approached. Ma'am, did you know the suspect? Were you his customer? Can you comment on the arrest? Delgado stepped between them. No questions right now. But the reporter wasn't easily deterred. Ms. Carter, was this racial discrimination? Do you think the FBI acted fast enough? Aisha froze. Words swirled in her head, but none of them felt safe. Instead, she brushed past him, out into the drizzle, and walked toward the corner where she'd parked. That's when she saw them 3 women, all black, standing together under a single umbrella. They were strangers, but the way they looked at her felt intimate, almost like family. One of them, an older woman with silver braids, gave a small nod. Not pity, not even exactly sympathy. More like acknowledgement. You're not alone, the nod seemed to say. Aisha swallowed hard and nodded back before unlocking her car. That night, the story exploded. She hadn't planned to watch the news, but when her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin turned on Channel 8 Curiosity 1. There she was, on screen. A still frame of her standing in the bank, her face half-shadowed, Whitford's finger jabbing toward her like an accusation. The anchor's voice narrated over it, describing a dramatic arrest following allegations of discriminatory lending practices at Whitford Financial. They played the cell phone video someone had taken in the lobby. Every word Whitford had thrown at her was now public. The humiliation she'd felt in that moment was suddenly shared by thousands of strangers. She thought it would make her feel exposed, maybe even ashamed. But instead, it was like the shame had been scooped out of her chest and dumped squarely into his. Still, it wasn't easy. The internet had opinions, endless streams of them. Supporters flooded her social media with messages of solidarity, calling her brave. But the other side was just as loud, accusing her of playing the race card, of ruining a good man's career. She closed her laptop. 2 days later, Delgado called. We've uncovered more than we expected, the agent said. Dozens of cases. Some go back years. But we'll need your help if you're willing testifying. Maybe even speaking publicly. Aisha hesitated. Speaking publicly? It could help push for policy changes. This case is going to get attention either way. She thought about the silver-haired woman outside the bank, about the quiet nod that had felt like a passing of some invisible torch. She thought about her grandmother polishing brass railings in buildings she'd never be allowed to work in as anything other than the help. Maybe it was time to hold the torch instead of passing it. "When do we start?" she asked. The FBI's case grew like wildfire. Documents Whitford thought he'd buried surfaced in neat, damning stacks. Internal emails revealed coded language phrases like "client doesn't align with community profile," which were, as one investigator bluntly put it, just corporate speak for racism. News outlets began digging deeper. They found former employees willing to talk, tellers who'd been told to find reasons to delay certain applications, loan officers instructed to push upscale properties toward buyers who'd fit in. The public pressure was mounting, and for once, it wasn't Aisha who felt cornered. The morning of the preliminary hearing, the courthouse steps were swarmed. Delgado had offered to arrange a private entrance, but Aisha declined. She walked straight up the main stairs, past the cameras, past the shouts of her name. Inside, she took the stand. Her voice didn't shake. She told the judge exactly what happened, every word Whitford had said, every look, every implication. She told him about the months of delays, about the way his tone changed the moment she walked into the room. And when the defense attorney tried to twist her words, she didn't flinch. When it was over, she stepped down from the stand and glanced toward the gallery. The three women from that rainy afternoon were there, sitting together in the second row. The silver-haired one gave that same nod. And this time, Aisha smiled. The courtroom air was heavy, thick with the stale scent of old wood and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Whitford sat at the defense table in a tailored charcoal suit, his posture still proud, but his skin pale. His lawyers whispered furiously, passing papers back and forth, but the man who once owned every room he walked into now looked like he was borrowing space. The prosecution moved quickly. They called former employees who, one by one, painted a picture of a culture built on polite discrimination. A young Latino man named Javier testified first. "I worked there for 2 years," he said, hands clasped tightly. "I was told straight out by my manager that certain zip codes were not the right demographic for our loans. I knew what that meant. Everyone did." The defense tried to object, calling it hearsay, but the judge allowed it. Then came Marlene, a former loan officer in her 40s. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed something: anger, maybe shame. "They told me to delay applications from certain clients. That if I couldn't find a legitimate reason, to check for irregularities." She paused. "One day, Mr. Whitford came into my office and said, 'You don't have to outright deny them, just make it so hard they give up.'" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Whitford didn't look at her. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed every recess. The trial had become more than just a legal proceeding, it was a public reckoning. Headlines framed it as a battle between entrenched power and a growing movement against systemic racism in finance. Aisha didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Photographers trailed her down the courthouse steps. Journalists called her the face of the case. She hated the phrase. It made it sound like she'd asked for this. But she also knew that sometimes faces moved people more than facts. One night, after a particularly grueling day of testimony, she found herself sitting in her living room with the lights off, phone in hand. Her inbox was full, hundreds of messages. Some were cruel, accusing her of exaggerating or trying to get rich off a sob story. But most were from strangers thanking her, sharing their own experiences. Loans denied for no clear reason, landlords who suddenly lost rental agreements when they saw a last name, promotions that never came. It was overwhelming. She wasn't a politician or an activist. She was just a woman who wanted a house. But maybe that was the point. On the third week of the trial, the prosecution brought in the big guns, financial analysts from the FBI's white-collar division. They displayed charts on courtroom monitors, cold, hard data showing approval rates plummeting when the applicant's race wasn't white. They showed internal memos with lines like "prioritize community compatibility" and "evaluate cultural fit," phrases that sounded harmless until you saw the patterns. Whitford's lawyers tried to argue the bank was merely maintaining brand integrity. It was a weak defense, and even they seemed to know it. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Halfway through the fourth week, the defense requested a closed-door session with the prosecution and the judge. Court was adjourned for the day, But rumors swirled in the hallway. Delgado found Aisha by the elevators. "They're talking about a settlement," she said. "If Whitford pleads to lesser charges, pays fines, and steps down from the board, the trial ends." "And what about the discrimination charges?" Aisha asked, heat rising in her voice. "They'd be dropped." It felt like the air had been punched out of her. So he gets to walk away? Start fresh somewhere else? Maybe do it all over again? Delgado's jaw tightened. It's complicated. There's pressure from people higher up. Banks are powerful, and they don't like prolonged public trials. Aisha looked past her, through the courthouse glass doors, at the crowd of people waiting outside. The silver-haired woman was there again, this time holding a hand-painted sign. "Justice, not deals." "I'm not agreeing to it," Aisha said. "You might not have a choice." That night, sleep wouldn't come. She replayed everything: the bank lobby, the arrest, the trial. She thought about her grandmother cleaning those brass railings, about all the families who'd been denied without even realizing it was discrimination. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years, an old college friend named Rochelle, now a journalist for a major national outlet. "Rochelle, it's Aisha. I need to tell you something off the record first." The next morning, the headline was everywhere. "Key witness in Whitford discrimination trial rejects settlement. Justice is not for sale." The article quoted her directly, calling the potential deal a betrayal to every person who's been quietly pushed out of opportunity because of the color of their skin. It included excerpts from the trial, the testimony, and the damning data. It painted the settlement for what it was: an escape hatch for the powerful. Public outrage exploded. By the afternoon, protesters lined the courthouse steps, chanting, holding signs, some even wearing shirts printed with her words. The story hit national broadcasts. Lawmakers started tweeting about it. The Department of Justice released a statement saying they were reviewing the integrity of any proposed agreements. The next day, the judge announced that the settlement talks were over. The trial would proceed. When Whitford took the stand in his own defense, the room was electric. He was defiant, claiming he was a victim of a smear campaign, that his words were taken out of context, that lending decisions were purely financial. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Shaw, didn't let him off the hook. "Mr. Whitford, do you recall telling Ms. Carter, people like you aren't the kind of people we want in that neighborhood?" "I never said that." Shaw clicked a remote, and the screen behind them lit up with a grainy but clear cell phone video, Whitford's own voice ringing through the speakers. The words echoed, undeniable. The jury watched him squirm. By the time he stepped down, his credibility was shredded. The closing arguments were brutal. Shaw painted a picture of deliberate, calculated exclusionist system designed to look neutral while quietly enforcing a color line. The defense, visibly weary, tried to spin it as misunderstandings and imperfect business language, but even they seemed to know it was over. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Aisha sat in the back, hands clasped, staring at the polished wood grain of the bench in front of her. She didn't pray, not exactly, but she did think of her father's words, the ones she'd thrown at Whitford that day, the measure of a man. 2 hours later, the jury returned. They found Whitford guilty on all counts related to fraud and discriminatory lending. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, plus restitution to victims, a figure so high it would bankrupt him. Gasps filled the room. Some people clapped. The silver-haired woman wept silently. Aisha just exhaled, the breath she'd been holding for months finally escaping. Outside, the rain had stopped. The steps of the courthouse gleamed under a pale winter sun. Reporters surged toward her, but she didn't stop for them. She walked straight down the steps, past the cameras, into the open air. And for the first time since she'd walked into Whitford's bank, she felt free. Freedom didn't mean quiet. If anything, the weeks after the verdict were louder than the trial itself. Her phone didn't stop buzzing: messages from journalists, invitations to speak at conferences, requests for interviews from networks she'd grown up watching. The media had decided that Aisha Carter wasn't just the face of the Whitford case, she was now a voice in the fight against systemic discrimination in finance. It was flattering. It was exhausting. Her lawyer told her she didn't owe anyone anything, that she could vanish from the spotlight now if she wanted. But each time she thought about pulling back, she remembered the inbox full of stories from strangers who'd seen themselves in her fight. She remembered the silver-haired woman's nod. She remembered her grandmother's calloused hands on those brass railings. So she kept going. A month after the sentencing, Aisha was invited to speak before a congressional subcommittee on housing and urban development. The hearing room was nothing like a courtroom brighter, almost sterile, but the stakes felt just as high. Cameras were everywhere. Lawmakers sat in a long row, shuffling papers and tapping microphones. When it was her turn, she adjusted the mic and began. "I'm not a politician. I'm not an activist. I'm just a woman who wanted to buy a house," she said. "But in trying to do that, I ran into something bigger than mesothing that's been baked into our financial systems for decades. I'm here today because I don't want my story to just be a headline. I want it to mean change." She spoke for 15 minutes, not with fire and anger, but with precision and truth. She talked about the coded language, the deliberate delays, the subtle ways people in power hid behind policy to deny opportunity. She urged them to strengthen oversight, to increase transparency in lending, to protect whistleblowers. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat before the chairperson thanked her. Cameras clicked like distant rain. Policy changes didn't happen overnight, but the pressure stayed. Advocacy groups seized on the momentum from the trial. Lawmakers began drafting what the press later called the Carter Reforms, a package of regulations aimed at holding banks accountable for discriminatory practices. Her name was on something bigger than herself now, and that came with its own weight. She wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over, but she'd cracked something open, and once the light was in, it was hard to put it back. Away from the public eye, life was quieter. She closed on her house 6 months after the trial, a modest 2-story with a front porch big enough for a rocking chair. The day she got the keys, she stood in the empty living room and let the silence fill her. This was hers. Earned. Fought for. Her first night there, she sat on the porch with a mug of tea. The air was cool, the street quiet. Across the way, a little boy rode his bike in uneven circles under a street lamp. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. For the first time in years, she felt at home. One Saturday morning, months later, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, the silver-haired woman from the courthouse stood there, holding a small bouquet of fresh flowers. "I'm sorry to just show up," the woman said. "I thought about calling, but some things you just need to say in person." "Please come in," Aisha said, stepping aside. The woman sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "My name's Lorraine," she began. "I was at the bank that day in the lobby. I saw what he said to you. I've been watching ever since. And I wanted to thank you for not letting them sweep it under the rug. You don't know how many of us have been through the same thing and just let it go. Not because we wanted to, but because we thought nothing would change." Aisha swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I didn't do it alone." Lorraine smiled faintly. "No one ever does. But someone has to start." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Lorraine stood. "I'll let you get back to your day. I just wanted you to know you did more than win a case. You gave people permission to speak." After she left, Aisha set the flowers on the windowsill. The morning light caught the petals, making them almost glow. The invitations kept coming: panels, advocacy meetings, even a documentary. She accepted some, declined others. She learned to say no without guilt. She learned that her worth wasn't measured by how much of herself she gave away. One evening, she received an email from a young woman in Chicago. "Ms. Carter, I saw your testimony. I thought I was the only one. My loan application was denied for reasons that didn't make sense, and I've been afraid to challenge it. But now I think I'm going to try. Thank you." Aisha closed her laptop and stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes tinkled. She realized she was smiling. The following spring, she was invited to speak at a university. The auditorium was packed: students, professors, community members. Her talk wasn't about the trial anymore. It was about resilience, about refusing to shrink in the face of injustice, about the quiet power of saying no when the world expects you to bow your head. During the Q&A, a student asked, "Do you think racism in banking will ever really end?" Aisha thought for a long moment before answering. "I think systems don't change because one person wins a fight. They change because enough people refuse to stop fighting. My case was one step. Yours might be another. The point isn't to finish it, it's to keep going." The room was quiet, but not heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes from listening. 2 years later, She stood in front of a row of townhouses, not for herself this time, but for a family she'd helped through a community lending program she'd co-founded. The parents held their 2 kids close, grinning for the photo. Behind them, a banner read, "Welcome home." As she handed them the keys, the little girl looked up at her and asked, "Is this really ours?" Aisha knelt, smiling. "It's really yours." The girl's eyes widened, and in that moment, Aisha saw the entire reason she'd fought so hard, not for headlines, not even for policy, but for moments like this. Later that evening, she walked home under a sky streaked with the last colors of sunset. She unlocked her own front door, stepped inside, and paused in the quiet. Her grandmother's photograph hung on the wall by the door, smiling in her Sunday best, eyes bright. Aisha touched the frame gently. "We're still going," she whispered. And somewhere deep in her chest, she knew that was enough. The fight wasn't over. It might never be. But Aisha Carter had carved her place in it, firm, unshakable, lit by the knowledge that even one voice could start an echo too loud to ignore. And in the years to come, when others stood in rooms where they were told they didn't belong, they would remember her name, not as the face of a trial, but as the woman who said, "Justice is not for sale." Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.